Hello, and welcome back to Rewildology, the show that explores conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. March was a bang! We added 4 new countries to the show's country list and traveled literally all over the globe exploring conservation. If you missed an episode and would like to hear a little snippet before diving into the full thing, check out these highlights to see if you might want to go back and listen to the episode in its entirety. All right, let's dive in. First, in March, we met Miha Krofel, PhD, head of Wildlife Ecology and Management Research Group at the University of Ljubljana and a member of the IUCN's Cat Specialist Group, Canid Specialist Group, and Large Carnivore Initiative of Europe. And then also, I was just poking around your ResearchGate, and I saw this headline, or this paper that you published, I think it was in October, about, it said golden jackal as a new kleptoparasite for Eurasian lynx in Europe. So there's a new thing now for the lynx? Golden jackals, is that new or just new to science, or what's the story behind that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, actually. It's one of the most dramatic changes we are seeing in carnivore world in Europe in the last few decades is definitely a jackal. Golden jackal is it's basically a counterpart of a coyote have in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And similar like coyotes were spreading in some parts of North America. It's similar to expansion of golden jackal, but maybe let's say, times 10 or times 100 even, because historically golden jackal was very limited in Europe. It was present for at least centuries, but probably millennia. It was basically limited to the fringes of Europe, especially the coastlines and islands of the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. So Southeast Europe, like I said, at least for centuries. And then suddenly, towards the end of the 19th century, it started expanding. And especially after Second World War, it's just like a boom. It's it's crazy. Like it's exponentially increasing. For example, it was probably, I will guesstimate a bit, but maybe we had few hundreds of jackals stop, and now suddenly we have over 100,000, maybe coming close to the 500,000. Yeah, it's just crazy how it basically exploded. It's showing kind of its characteristics, what you expect from the invasive alien species that comes to a new place and just starts spreading like crazy. And we're seeing, and this is like a native carnivore here. Nobody brought it here. So, of course, there was a big question, what triggered this massive response? So from basically really limited to these fringes of Europe for centuries, and then suddenly it's like all over the place. We have now jackals all the way to the tip of Norway. There are now 4 jackals in France. Germany, the whole Central Europe is full of them, Pannonian Basin, they really spread a lot. And when we're looking into the potential changes that happen in Europe that would allow jackal to spread, it all points in the same direction. And this seems to be the wolf, the gray wolf, or more precisely, lack of wolves. Because in the same period, actually, when jackals started spreading, this time that wolves became really heavily persecuted throughout Europe. And we actually exterminated most of the wolf populations here. They just survived, especially, let's say, after the Second World War. They were limited to just these most remote forested, mountains of Europe. But from everywhere, from the lowlands and large part of Europe was without wolves. And this is what it seems to enable jackal to really start spreading. So it's a similar story. Like we know with coyotes also, they're spreading to areas when the wolves were exterminated, especially the East Coast, also like Labrador, even places where probably there were no coyotes historically, but after wolves were exterminated, this kind of enabled them to spread there. And it seems similar process, just on a much bigger scale, is happening in Europe with the golden jackal. Yeah, of course. And one of the questions is, what are these jackals bringing? We don't call it alien species because, it's native and it's spreading on its own. It's not that people were moving it, but still it's a new species. A species that was not present in Europe, ever. So big question is then also what are these animals bringing? So how they will change the ecosystems, because they are, can be very effective scavengers. They are also, predator of many rodents, but they also go for young or even adult ungulates. So we don't really know what's coming with them. And one of the first cases, actually, that what we observed is that similar to the brown bear, they also start showing up at the lynx kills and kept present on the lynx kills. So, I don't expect it will ever be as intensive as with the brown bear, but still it's kind of an interesting phenomena to follow, how these new species showed up and is now interacting with species like lynx, relying on their food. Interestingly, actually, what we're seeing now is because lynx overlaps a lot in their distribution with the wolf, because they both survived in these more remote, mountainous forest areas. And because still wolf has a major impact on the jackal distribution, there's just a recent paper we're now submitting where we tested like different parameters that affects the presence of jackal in Europe. And actually the stable wolf pack is number one reason why there will be affecting probability of jackal present. And because the wolves, they overlap with lynx, it seems that actually wolves as kind of a protection from the jackal for the lynx.
Wow.
So, usually think about lynx and wolf as competitors,
Right.
and they don't see that they would, really be friends. But in this interaction, when you have this now third species now coming in, the jackal, they actually seems to be, enemy of your enemy is a friend.
Yeah.
So,
Common enemy.
because between wolves and lynx, actually we don't see that much negative interactions. They definitely compete for the same prey species, but we don't see much kleptoparasitism. We didn't find any case of like wolves killing lynx and stuff like that. Perhaps the wolves can in the end actually be a good guy for the lynx, because they will prevent jackals coming over. Because the problem with jackal is, in a way, they can attain very high densities. So basically, in one territory of one wolf pack, you can easily have 50 or maybe even 100 jackal territories.
Whoa.
Because they have much smaller territories, and so they have much higher densities. So you can imagine, even let's say one wolf will take, I don't know, let's say 5 kills from lynx per year, because they have so much jackals. Even if one jackal would take, not even a single kill every year, there are so many jackals in the end, they would still take much more kills from the lynx than let's say the wolf. So it's potentially it could be a big factor. Although there is one big difference, let's say, especially if we compare it with the brown bear, is that lynx very likely can defend the kill from the jackal.
Oh yeah.
At least it's with one jackal. We're not sure what happens when there's like a whole family of jackals, a whole pack. But at least against one, it's a cat, and you don't want to mess with a cat, especially if it's bigger than you.
Right.
While against bear, lynx doesn't have a chance. Just the size difference just too big, so there's no way that lynx would defend it against the bear. So that's another aspect that we'll have to see. We have to follow in the future to see how this interaction establishes itself.
Second, we sat down with Michelle LaRue, PhD, spatial ecologist and associate professor of Antarctic marine science at the University of Canterbury. So I think that the main theme of today is starting to bring itself up, and this is mapping, your mapping work. So how did this apply to what you end up continuing on doing? And maybe if you want to even maybe teach us a little bit about the species that you work with a lot too. So how, maybe just let's take this big picture. What exactly do you do? And how did all of this come together maybe at this point in your life?
Oh God. So I asked I'm like, what do I do for a living? I don't even know.
I asked
sometimes. Like,
myself the
what?
same
I
thing.
know. Like, what is it that I do? I answer emails. That's what I do. That's the
Amen.
actual answer. What have I been trained to do? That's a different question. So what I've been trained to do is, as a wildlife ecologist, spatial ecologist, what I've been trained to do is to kind of figure out where animals are, how many there are, and why they live in certain places over others, and kind of just real generally, that's what I do. But along those lines, the other thing that I do and learn to do really well is to count them from space. So like looking at high resolution satellite imagery, that's been kind of my jam over the past 15 years or so, is like trying to figure out how we can use new technology, high resolution satellite imagery, to understand where what else seals live, where emperor penguins live, Adelie penguins, crab-eater seals, and then even in the Arctic, looking for like muskox and polar bears. So that's really the work that I've been trying to kind of figure out as I go along. So it's looking at habitat and spatial distributions of animals. So that's essentially what I do, is I try to figure out, like, for the past, 10 years or so, I would say I've been trying to figure out how to use that technology to understand what we're seeing, right? Because you can't just take an image and then count everything you see and then say that's how many there are. It's far more complicated than that. And so with all these different species, it's been a matter of like methodically figuring out what we can say with the imagery and what that then translates to as far as population trends, population estimates, habitat, what's going to happen in the future, that kind of a thing. So yeah, it's been a lot of kind of trial and error, I would say, over the past 10 to 15 years or so.
Yeah, and that's so cool because me not really knowing about this type of research before I sat down with you, which is so cool. I would feel like this would give you access to areas that we probably normally couldn't survey, right? I would imagine.
That is the most that was the most exciting part of the realization that we could see these animals from a satellite image, because it's like, oh my God, this completely changes everything. Because doing work in Antarctica, most of the animals that are studied at all, let alone like long-term studies, are nearby research stations, right? So it's this like proximity to be able to physically
Mm.
get to them, right? Well, Antarctica is huge, right? And the coastline is thousands and thousands of miles long. And there's a lot of places where these animals could be. And so there's a lot we're missing out on. And so if we can see and have this remote view, that completely changes everything. And so that was really probably one of the more exciting things for me as a scientist, was having that realization of going like, oh my gosh, I have a background in wildlife ecology, like a passion for conservation, and I have these skills in, remote sensing, interpretation, and GIS, and seeing, the little black dots on the white ice and realizing those are what else fields. It's like, oh, this changes everything. I'm like, oh my God, we can actually see the coastline. We can see these places that we can't physically get to, and have for the first time the ability to know how many there are. And that's just, I mean, we just never had the ability to do that. So it's really been really exciting.
Next in March, we had a fantastic conversation with Rommel Vega, CEO of Holo Footwear. So, why did you feel it was part of your mission to launch a sustainable shoe brand? You could have become the, sustainability director, or like
Yeah.
a sustainability director for another shoe brand that would have gladly hired you to essentially build their sustainable shoe line. But you decided that you needed to go do your own thing. So what void did you see in the sustainable outdoor shoe world that you felt that you could fill that you wouldn't be able to fill in like a bigger company?
Yeah, it definitely is a passion, right? Like I think when you do this, you're following your passion. I think that's first and foremost. When the whole idea came up, I was simply going to start a shoe company, right? The beginning wasn't like, I want to start a sustainable company. The beginning was, I want to start a shoe company that's affordable, that looks really good. And then, it's interesting, my wife now, who was my girlfriend at that time, she's much, much smarter than I am. She was like, well, if you're going to start a company, like, you got to make it sustainable. I was like, you know what? I think you're onto something, right? And so we got into this path, and I'm like, what is sustainability? Like, what is what is it exactly? And like, I'm a think very different mindset of what something is sustainable, right? Because that word gets thrown around like, oh my God, everyone does it, right? And so I'm just sitting here like, look, I've been to China, like I know how shoes are made, like I know how materials actually sourced. Like, so there was a point in time when I was driving back and forth from Michigan to Oregon during that pandemic, because she lived in Michigan, I still have a place in Oregon. And I was stopping like places like Iowa, I was stopping places like, Montana, like I was stopping places like Wyoming, which if you've ever been, is a vast piece of land. All you do is think and drive, like windshield time. And like, I took a flight once from Portland to Michigan, and I was reading a magazine, and it was talking about a certain brand. And I'll be honest, it just rubbed me the wrong way, in a weird way, because I've been doing footwear for so long that it was like, it's like the Silicon Valley, uniform, and the coolest thing in town, the coolest shoes, and they're made sustainably. And, I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, where's the added value for the customer, right? I was thinking to myself, like, where is the added value there? Like, because somebody who's influential wears a pair of shoes that it's made responsibly, claim to be a brand, or any brand really, that like, oh, we can measure CO2, and I'm sitting here like, wait a minute, there's no way in hell you can measure a CO2 of a shoe. There's just no way. And I've been doing this for a long time. And so I set out to create a brand that was just like honest, like down and dirty, like super raw, just like real honest in the way we make our brand, our product and our brand. Like we don't have any certifications, right? Because like, why do you need certification? You're like an adult. Like you should just do the right thing. Like who made certain people that certify other brands? Like the police of sustainability, first of all. Like they're all making money. They are all making money. Every time you see that label on something, they get paid, right? And so I refuse to do that because I know how product is made. And so we set out to create this real honest company that is not going to upcharge something because it's made responsibly. We're not going to upcharge our customer, and our consumer is not going to have to pay and overpay for product, which for a fact, I know how much it costs to make because I've been where it's made. And I spent a lot of time where it's made. I understand materials. I know how it's made. And so they're charging for brand and they're charging for, certain things that it just like really rubbed me the wrong way. And so I set out to be a disruptor. I was like, I'm going to disrupt this nonsense. What it is just nonsense that the consumer has to overpay for something that is doing the right thing, right? So it's like, I don't know, I'm a big fan of Spike Lee, so like, do the right thing. Like if I could have that shirt on right now, I would do the right thing, right? But it's like, you start become disruptive. You're like, you know what, I'm going to create a product that looks really good. That's everybody on the team has worked at a bunch of different companies, so we all really know the system, how it works. So we're kind of like their biggest nightmare, because now we went and created this brand on the ethos that sustainability should be for all. You got to democratize it. It should be for people who are for lower incomes. It should be for people higher income. It should be for people who live in Wyoming, not just like San Francisco and not just New York. It has to be for everyone for us to really make a difference in recycling trash. I mean, if only the cool kids in school are wearing, and that's 2 out of 10, like they're not really making a difference. And if you really cared about people and sustainability, do you make it affordable to everybody? Like that's our challenge, not only to the industry, but that's our challenge to ourselves as a brand. It's like, let's take the talent and the knowledge that we've gained and really flip this industry on its head. And then on top of that, we can say, and I dare anybody to, tell us that we don't know what we're talking about, because they can't disvalue your opinion because you've done it. And so we're being disruptive in a cool way, and we're finding really cool partnership. And like I said, we don't play the certification thing. We don't have the cool stickers on our window in our office, on our boxes. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna play that game. That's nonsense. Like, we are doing the best we can to make the best footwear made in the best possible way, responsibly. That means, not overcharging the consumer for something. And the beauty is, then you start selling shoes at like Nordstrom's and REI, and like it validates you. Like it's super funny. It's super cool. Like I love to see my $65 pair of shoes that's made in the same factory as everyone else really sit next to like the $200 pair of shoes. And it's like, it's just great. And people are buying it and it's fun. And it's a serious business, but it's really more of a like, wait a minute, like we got to change this narrative that like sustainability is just for like the cool kids and this and that. Like, no. It has to be for everyone, and everyone has to participate simply because everyone should have the right to participate in making and buying responsible stuff. The more people can participate in it, and you can talk about brand and brand direction. But if you really want to make a difference, like don't price them out, price them in, allow them to participate with their wallets, which I think some of them can't because it's too expensive. And so they'll never be able to participate in making a difference because they get priced out.
4th in March, I dove into top headlines and discussed Utah's mountain lions with Denise Peterson and gave a rundown of the controversial Willow project. Well, hi, Denise. Okay, so my online feed has been blowing up with what's going on with Utah's mountain lions. Could you maybe just explain the situation to me, who I know a little bit, but I don't know near as much as I could know, and then maybe someone who might not have any idea what's going on with Utah's mountain lions. So what's the situation? Can you just bring us up to speed on what's going on?
Yeah, so absolutely. A few weeks back, we had our legislative session, and two representatives, Senator Snyder and Senator Sandall, introduced at the very last minute, and I'm talking a couple hours before the actual bill was voted on, regulation to open mountain lions up to year-round hunting and trapping. And so, to clarify, right now, trapping is not allowed whatsoever of mountain lions in Utah. So they introduced this a couple hours before the bill was voted on, and a number of the folks who actually voted on this bill weren't even aware that it had been introduced. So the public didn't have an opportunity to comment on it. Representatives that don't support hunting of lions voted for it. So there's been a lot of controversy with it because it's very deceptive to introduce something like this at the last possible minute with almost nobody knowing and having the chance to comment on it in such a way that it would pretty much overhaul the management of cougars in Utah. And the problem with that is that with the language being the way that it is that it essentially removes power from the Division of Wildlife Resources, biologists, researchers, scientists, people who know the animals and understand the animals. It takes the power to manage them away from the Division of Wildlife Resources. Essentially, at the end of the day, if this is signed into law, what will happen is mountain lions will no longer be a big game species here in Utah. It was interesting. I was talking to one of my colleagues. The status of mountain lions will be more closely to, say, like a skunk, essentially.
What?
So, yeah, they won't have protections like they do now. And all you'll need is a license, and you'll be able to go out and kill lions. And again, this is year-round, so there are a lot of problems with it. It doesn't take into account all of the research that's been done in the past and currently going on here in Utah about lions and their impact on mule deer and predation rates, and not even thinking about their role in a healthy, functioning, and resilient ecosystem. So essentially, it's, I don't want to say waging war on lions, but it's very similar too, because you're taking the science out of management and just saying, okay, we're just going to go out and kill as many lions as we can using all methods possible, which includes now hunting and trapping. So it's pretty bad.
So was this like a rider to a bill? Like they just like kind of snuck it in on the backside to something else that was going on, especially if the people in power didn't even know that this was coming. And so what was that? What was it tied to? I'm assuming something else that, like you said, that people that wouldn't normally support this, they voted on it. So I'm assuming it was attached as a rider to some bigger issue. Do you by chance know what that was and how it got tied into it?
Yeah. So as to how they tied it into it exactly, I can't say, but the bill itself was amendments to wildlife regulations, and it most specifically addressed camera trapping regulations more than anything. There was some other regulations about CWMUs and whatnot, but they slipped these regulations in a little bit lower down, like lines 260, 270, somewhere around there, and basically slipped it in. And it's just a few lines that redefines them from a big game species to not being a big game species anymore. And then it opens them up to trapping in the language.
So who did this? Who inserted this line into the bill? Like who's at fault?
Who's at fault? That's a complicated question. There's a lot more to it, but the very Reader's Digest version is it was Senators Scott Sandall and Senator Casey Snyder. And there's a lot of interesting things going on right now, too, with these representatives, particularly Representative Snyder. It just came to my attention this morning that there's a lawsuit right now involving Senator Snyder up in Summit County because he tried to do this same thing, where he tried to slide in another piece of legislation on something completely unrelated. So it's not the first time he's done something like this, and they have interest in ranching. There's a lot more to it than that, obviously. But these are the two representatives that did slip this in at the very last moment.
Do they have certain reasons? Meaning, like, are they? I guess maybe from like a biological standpoint, is there something wrong going on with the mountain lions? Like, why would they want the population to be completely decimated? What do you feel is probably their motivation for wanting to do this?
Good question. So the thing that we hear most often is that the reason that they want to reduce the lion population here is so that they can boost the mule deer population. They're concerned that there's an ever increasing population of lions across Utah. And while that was true, I'd say for the last 20 years or so, in the last 3, since HB 125 passed in 2020, harvest has increased substantially across the state. So we're actually seeing a decline in mountain lion numbers. And if you want, I can get you the exact numbers on them later in terms of harvest and whatnot. So they've already been trying pretty intensively for the last 3 years to knock lion numbers down so that they can try and increase mule deer numbers. And in all but one unit, it did not help. So in only one unit did they see any kind of evidence that there might be an increase in mule deer numbers. But the rest of them, it didn't help whatsoever. It's typically other drivers, so like harsh winters, habitat loss, drought, things like that, that are causing the mule deer decline. But the approach continues to be kill more lions, we'll get more deer. It's not supported by the science, it's not supported by the research, but that is something that you'll often hear touted, and likely that has a significant part to play in this.
Lastly, for the month, we met Anna Maziuk, Polish author and the writer of Instinct. So let's actually start diving into that. Before we get to your book itself, because this is a whole other process that just is fascinating to me, could you teach us a little bit about Poland's wolves and maybe their history of what they've gone through and then up until today? So yeah, let's just have the Polish wolves 101,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. No. Of course. It's kind of similar story to, Polish wolves and let's say Czech wolves or German wolves. I don't know if they have nationalities, at least that they are aware of. But yeah, it would be the same story, similar story for most of European countries. But the more to the east of Europe, the better wolves were treated, I would say. But not because I think it may have been connected with the poorness of the countries in the past. So yeah, 15th century gone already in England. And in Poland, we started hunting wolves in around 19th century. So they were quite lucky in that sense, because we started to do it quite late. And so they were hunted somehow, but still they're in the forest. But wars were always kind of breaks for wolves in the whole world. Because, during the war, people just want to feed themselves and they don't eat wolves, they don't eat predators. So yeah, they just let them go, let them leave, let them be. They don't eat most of the predators, at least, and it's not the best flesh to eat. So yeah, during the Second World War in Poland, wolves population got a bit bigger. Hunters estimated it for around 700 wolves. But after the war, they thought it's too many. We should do something about it. So they actually decided in 1956, so some 11 years after the end of the war, when the war was already finished, they decided that they're gonna eliminate wolves on purpose, and everybody like you and I could just go to the forest and do it, pick a pup from a den or put some poison near the den and, kill wolves like that. And we would be paid for that. Everybody could kill a wolf. It was allowed. It was even, you were welcomed, or you were, what's the word for it? Invited and rewarded for that.
Mm-hmm.
So they almost eliminated all of the wolves in Poland. Around 50, they estimated, lasted in the 70s. So they said, okay, it's maybe not enough. They can actually get, totally, they can be gone soon, totally. So they decided to change the law. So only the hunters could actually kill wolves, and it was not allowed to poison them or to take the little ones from the dens from that point. So 75, okay, the population started to grow a little bit, but still it was going slowly. And wolves were actually seen only on the eastern part of Poland, near Białowieża forest, which is the ancient forest, near the mountains where I went to see my first wolves. I mean, the tracks, I didn't meet the actual wolf, an actual wolf back then. So it was in the mountains and the eastern parts, actually the border of Poland, and they didn't migrate to other parts. So they said, something is not correct, something's not working here. And in the late 80s and in the 90s, some NGO organizations started to advocate for a total protection of wolves. And it took some years, but in 1998, it started in 1995, actually, in some parts of Poland, we got full protection of wolves in whole Poland. So since 24 years now, they are protected. And when it started, the population was around 700 before the war. And now in 2019, they did some DNA countings, like national, wild countings. This program said it's around almost 2,000 wolves.
And that is it, a snapshot of March's global episodes. If you have a question about any of these episodes, please submit your question in the Rewildologist Facebook group. As always, I want to thank you for being a part of the Rewildology community. If you'd like to support the show, some zero-cost ways include subscribing to the podcast on your favorite streaming app, leaving a rating and review to boost the algorithm, which will present the podcast to more listeners, signing up for the weekly Rewildology newsletter at rewildology.com, subscribing to the YouTube channel, and following the show on your favorite social media app. If you'd like to financially support the show and help us keep these stories on the airwaves, consider making a monetary donation at rewildology.com or purchase a piece of swag to show off your Rewildology love. At least 10% of proceeds from this podcast will be donated to our conservation partners. I'd also like to thank Focusrite for powering the podcast sound. If you'd like to see the Focusrite gear we use to record the show, head on over to rewildology.com and check out Nature Podcasting under the Resources tab. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet. Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.